Welcome to the Franciscan Spirituality Center in La Crosse, Wisconsin's What is Spirituality podcast. Your host, Steve Spilde, is the Associate Director at the Center. His guests talk about their evolving understanding of God, prayer, healing, and wholeness.
My name is Steve Spilde. Today I'm here with Vince Hatt, the longtime director of the Franciscan Spirituality Center. Tell me about your work at the Spirituality Center and maybe specifically your understanding of what the Spirituality Center is all about.
I started out as basically a spiritual director, and from there I eventually became director of the Spiritual Director and Preparation Program, and then eventually became director. My purpose, I think, one of the main ones anyway, is to provide a safe place for people to explore the big questions of life. Mm-hmm. And it gave me the most joy when I saw people ask themselves the hard questions and go deeper.
Mm-hmm. So tell me how you came to the Franciscan Spirituality Center.
I was a priest in Iowa for 27 years. I resigned in 1993. I called Mary Catherine to basically cancel during a retreat because I was going to no longer be a priest. And she said, would you like to work here? And I said, well, sure. And she said, well, that's good. Then I said, how do I apply? And she said, oh, you're the only applicant. So I resigned on August 15th, 93, and started here September 7th, 93, and I worked here until I retired.
We're going to circle back to that, how you ended up here,
okay,
and how you resigned from the priesthood, but I want to find out how you entered the priesthood in the first place. So let's kind of rewind the tape
to
the beginning of your life.
Okay.
Tell me who Vince was as a young boy and how you ended up becoming a priest.
As a young boy, my purpose was to be successful. I not only wanted to be a good student, I wanted to be valedictorian in the class.
Did you succeed?
Yes. Of course. When I put my energy into something, it was focused. Then I not only want to be the best long-distance runner in my school, I wanted to be the best in the conference. So my focus was always on succeeding. Another question that rose pretty early is, what is my purpose? I'm a goal setter, and so what's my purpose? And on October 4th, 1957, I was on a way to a cross-country meet in Ames, Iowa, and the news it's breaking news. They didn't use that term as frequently as they do now. But the breaking news was that the Russians had set up the first space satellite, the Sputnik, and then right away I knew my purpose, and that was to catch up with the Russians in space. So because of my record, I was offered a full ride scholarship to Notre Dame in physics and math. I thought that was my purpose. I didn't particularly enjoy it, but it was, what am I supposed to do? Well, that was the environment. So I did that until the third year. I was taking a course called quantum mechanics, and about halfway through the course I thought, maybe someone else can help the United States catch up with the Russians in space. So I pulled out of that. And then the last year at Notre Dame, I was thinking about what was my purpose. And I decided, the church needs priests. Somebody's got to do it. And I was always kind of the guy, if somebody's got to do it, I would. And that had good results in some areas. Like when I was in high school, I got elected to any position. Usually I didn't volunteer, and they would come to me, and I said, well, somebody's got to do it. So that was kind of the person I was, and that's how I ended up a priest.
What was your experience in the church when you were young?
When I was young, I grew up in an Italian family, and the church was very important. I would go to church all the time with my grandparents and my parents. I think my first purpose in the church was to get to heaven. That was my spirituality, and that worked pretty well till I hit adolescence. Then I thought, this is not so easy. Pretty much the whole thing was getting to heaven.
What was your understanding of how you would get to heaven from that age?
Keep all the rules, excel in them, of course. I was going to be the best rule keeper. I've always had an intense desire to succeed. Mm-hmm. That was my drivenness.
What was your image of God at, say, teeny years?
Well, God sets the rules. If I keep them, I get eternal bliss. And that was the deal. Okay. And I was very practical. It might be a struggle, but hell, life only lasts so many years and heaven's forever.
So then, as a young man becoming a priest, at that point, had your view of God changed?
Not a whole lot. I think I was evolving into it's more a matter of loving rather than keeping the rules. And in fact, the basic rule was loving God above all and your neighbor as yourself. So it kind of took the emphasis off of keeping the rules to be a loving person.
So how was it for you as a priest?
It had its pluses and minuses. The pluses included the opportunity to be a part of people's lives at critical junctures in their lives. And they were forever grateful. I mean, if you were there when a parent died, the kids would never forget it. Mm-hmm. I mean, they would bring it up years later. Mm-hmm. But the hard part was, it was very isolating. I would be in a parish for 6 years, and then I would rip it all up and end those relationships and go start over in another place. It was exciting at first, a new challenge, but then after 20 years, it was like, man, this is lonely. So then that's when I started to say, maybe I have some other options. And I didn't like being the one who had, in middle management, had to deliver the message to the folks about stuff I really wasn't that enthused about. It took me a lot longer to leave than to enter. I decided to be a priest in a couple of years. The process of leaving took about 10 years, from the first rumblings to finally saying I'm leaving.
Was your understanding of God shifting during that time of rumbling?
Oh yeah, I came to the conclusion that my lifetime commitment was to God as I understood God, not to the church. So I could leave the priesthood and still be faithful to God. That was a big struggle originally. I was in the era when priests were leaving, and the ones who remained had more to do, and I had certain friendships that were originating through my priesthood, and so it was renegotiating important relationships as a layperson. It was hard, but finally, after 3 years of depression, I thought I had to do it. Mm-hmm. I would not be at peace until I did.
What was your understanding of spirituality at that time? If someone had asked you what is spirituality, what would have been your answer?
Spirituality was tied up with your relationship with God at that time. Now I would say spirituality is the lived experience of your values. So in that format, everyone has a spirituality. The lived experience of your values is to make a lot of money. That's your spirituality. Mm. So everybody has a spirituality. Now, the people that I saw here and in other places, that view of spirituality was bankrupt. There are bigger things, bigger questions like who am I? What is my purpose? How am I to live? Those are the big questions. And when I was younger, the emphasis was on what is my purpose. Now, as it evolved, the question more was, who am I really? Mm-hmm. That became a lot more important. Because if I knew who I was, I presumed the purpose would become clearer and how I was to live became clearer.
If you had to rewind the tape of your life,
sure,
what decisions might you have done differently or perhaps done sooner?
I believe, as Richard Rohr entitled the book, Everything Belongs. Mm-hmm. You know, everything, it's all part of the story. And just as Jacob wrestled with God all night and ended up with a damaged hip, in the struggle, I've learned a lot about me. So any of the struggles belong, and they took as long as they took. You know, Jacob wrestled with God because he sought a blessing. Mm-hmm. He wanted to be blessed. And I think my wrestling with God, meaning, purpose, needed to happen for me to be open to a blessing. It all belongs. I rewind my life, and I don't say, oh, I wish I made another decision. I rewind my life and say, isn't this interesting? This is really fascinating. What a story. I couldn't have written the plot if I tried. And actually, I tried. Mm-hmm. I tried to write the plot. And, you know, I was doing an RCIA retreat. These are people interested in becoming a Catholic. I had 16 people there. Most of them were UWL students. And I said, when I went off to Notre Dame to catch up with the Russians in space at your age, if you would have told me, well, at the age of 80, you'll be leading a retreat for college people who are considering becoming Christian or Catholic, I said, what are you smoking? That's what I would have said. What are you smoking? So I didn't plan it, but, you know, Saturday I felt like I'm just where I belong. Okay. This is where I belong. And there's no better feeling than that, because at different times in life I would sit in my chair and say, you know, I don't know where I belong, but it's not here.
At this point in your life, how would you describe God?
To God is a sacred presence that's always there. I cannot say specifically a description of God, because that would be to know the essence of God, which is way above my pay grade. But God, at the deepest part of myself, is there, and that would be my best guess right now. And that's all. When people ask me questions, my usual statement or assumption is, well, this is my best guess right now.
Couple of things I want to ask you. One is, you have a great story about sorting through the voices in your head, particularly the voice of anxiety, which has been a voice that you're well familiar with.
Yeah, I believe holiness is wholeness. You need to love every part of yourself, or else you cut it off and you're not whole. You're fragmented and less than you are. The best way, I named that part of me that drives for success as Successful Sam. And so I'm the chairman of a board of several people. There's Needless Ned, and there's Special whatever, you know. And so when I come to a decision now that's kind of confusing, I have to say to Successful Thing, you know, I love you, Sam. You've done a lot of good for me. I've accomplished a lot in my life because of you, Successful Sam. However, in this situation, there are other voices on this committee that need to be heard. There's Nurturing Ned. And so you're going to go do this RCIA program not to be successful, but to nurture these college students. So when I first noticed how driven I was for success, I tried to beat up Sam, cut him off. That didn't work. So I often have spontaneous meetings of the board and try to figure out who needs to be heard in this situation. When I feel this anxiety in me, I try to say, this is interesting. we might need to have a board meeting here. Not that I do this perfectly, but I do a lot better than I used to.
The other question I want to ask you, running has been an important part of your life.
Yes.
Have you gotten to a point where you connect running with spirituality? I mean, how does running inform your spirituality?
People ask me questions like that, and I say, as far as I know, running doesn't have to do anything to do with my spirituality. I ran on Saturday with my wife. We run together, and the sidewalks were sometimes slippery. And when we started out, we looked at each other and said, what the hell are we doing here? And basically, we ran because it hurts too much when we stop. You stop running, and then you got to start again. Oh, gee, that's painful. So we run through the winter, actually, on days that are somewhat reasonable, so we don't have to start over again. And it's mainly an energy thing. That is, it dissipates negative energy, and it gives me more energy to deal with the day. People will say, I have a mantra of prayer when I run, and I say, well, good for you. I'm trying to just get through it. I think running became a part of working through depression. I used to just force myself to get out there because I knew running was helpful. And of course, when I used to run as a young man, I ran to win. Now when I run, people say, well, how is it running at 80? And I said, it's really good in two ways. One is I don't have much competition. And secondly, there's no peer pressure. So it's kind of an easy thing to do. And when people pass you up, they'll say, keep going. You're doing a good job. I get a lot of support. I still finish in the middle of the pack. As long as I look around and see people there when I've crossed the line, I feel like, well, I'm not done yet. So once in a while, people ask, may I ask how old you are? I said, sure. And I would tell them. They go, well, I hope I'll be doing that when I'm that age. And then they beat off into the distance. So it's you have funny responses. When we finish the Packer 5K, you run around Lambeau Field and you come out and then you cross the finish line. And I didn't look too good because it was so hot that day. It was in July. And some volunteer came up and said, do you need a wheelchair? I said, no. And to myself, I said, a little morphine would help. So someday I'll probably say yes. I do need a wheelchair, but I haven't got there yet.
Thank you, Vince.
You're welcome.
If you have any questions about any of the programs that they offer at the Franciscan Spirituality Center in La Crosse, Wisconsin, we invite you to call us at 608-791-5295. That's 608-791-5295. You can also visit our website at www.fscenter.org. www.fscenter.org. Thank you for listening.